Call to order this regular session of the City Council. Roll call, please.
Mayor Brinkman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Stallman.
Here.
Councilmember Breckman.
Here.
Councilmember Cernanek.
Present.
Councilmember Cole.
Here.
Councilmember Taylor.
Present.
Councilmember Valdez.
Here.
Before we start our meeting this evening, I would like to ask everyone to join in a moment of silence for the tragedy that occurred. If you don't mind, we'll take a minute. Thank you. Okay, will you join me for the Pledge of Allegiance, please?
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have approval of the minutes, or approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda? Okay, seeing none, it is approved as submitted. Approval of the minutes from the November 6th meeting. These were corrected from our last regular meeting. Any changes? Okay, those are approved as submitted. Minutes of the study session from November 27th. Any changes? Those are also approved. And the minutes of our regular meeting from December 4th. Any changes? Okay, thank you. Those are approved also. City Manager, report.
Mayor, just one this evening. Proud to announce that Doug Farman, our Finance Director, has again received the government financer from the Government Financiers Officers Association the following statement. We are pleased to notify you that your comprehensive annual financial report for the fiscal year ended December 31, 2011 qualifies for a Certificate of Achievement for Excellence in Financial Reporting. The Certificate of Achievement is the highest form of recognition in government accounting and financial reporting, and its attainment represents a significant accomplishment by a government and its management. So we will, once we get it, we'll do the formal presentation for Doug, but giving you guys a heads up. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Beckman.
Nothing this evening. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Cernanek.
With the South Metro Denver Chamber, we had the opportunity for 5 council members and 3 staff members to attend the economic forecast breakfast that was held last Friday. And there were 5 executives from large businesses, would be probably too small to say, that provided presentations around how they view the economics in the state of Colorado over particularly this next year. Interesting observations were provided. In addition to that, the Economic Development Group of the Chamber had a regular EDG breakfast meeting the Friday before, and talked a lot about the impact of construction and the possibilities for the construction industry, and I've shared some of those comments with the other chamber members. In addition to those 2, the advisory board of the Economic Development Group has its every other month meeting tomorrow, and we'll be attending that on behalf of the city.
Thank you.
Nothing
Jerry.
there.
Thank you. Bruce.
No report.
Jim.
More time for me, right? I was somewhat surprised by the results that came out of the C470 citizen survey. The response were not as positive as I'd hoped they would be for any of the options that were presented to the citizens. After our meeting will be early next month, and we'll be having a discussion with the consultants about the results of the survey and then what possible next steps we may be looking at. CDOT has announced that they are changing their philosophy of not having full funding for any of their projects, their particularly multi-year projects. With the federal government passing a 2-year extension of the Surface Transportation Act and a 4-year extension of the federal gas tax, CDOT is releasing $300 million a year for the next 5 years out of their reserve funds, and it will be starting into funding construction projects. It won't solve the transportation problems we've got in the state, but it will be a big help. The transportation problems we've got here are multi-million dollar projects that won't be help, will just be helped with this, but not by a great deal. The Colorado Municipal League Policy Committee met and took positions on possible legislation. Then last week, the Executive Board met and approved those recommendations. The dues are going up by 3% for CML members, but they're giving a 5% rebate if you pay your dues by the end of January, which we usually do pay early so we get the full rebate. Staff also presented the information on the summer conference, and the board then discussed the impacts of the physical cliff would have on municipalities in Colorado. Picked up a program at CML about the NLC Congressional Cities Conference, and then I got one in the mail. Does everybody get those from NLC? If you don't, I've got a couple of extra copies I brought with me tonight, if you're interested in that. Dr. Cog report, the core committee of the Sustainable Communities Executive Committee met to discuss and review what we'll be dealing with the full executive committee meeting and the entire consortium upcoming meetings in January. I'm stepping down as chair of that group in the first quarter of 2013. We still, though, need to raise about $7 million in-kind, mostly in-kind, for the local match for the Sustainable Communities Grant. The Metro Vision Issues Committee took action to move forward with scenario analysis to help with the 2040 Metro Vision Plan. We'll also be using the Metro Vision Issues Committee. Will be looking at that, as well as the Metro Vision Planning Advisory Committee, and I think Glenn is on that committee, so he'll be getting reports of the scenario analysis as well. The Regional Transportation Committee met this morning and approved the delays in the Transportation Improvement Program for those projects that are delayed. They adopted the 2012 policy amendments to the Transportation Improvement Program and voted to ask the governor to appoint RTD as the lead agency for the 5310 federal funds. The Administrative Committee and the Board of Directors will meet tomorrow night for Dr. Cobb. That's it.
Thank you. Peggy?
For the folks here, probably you all know all these things because you're here and you're in tune. I suspect there are quite a few people watching at home. So I want to encourage people, based on the tragedy that just occurred in Connecticut. Remember, when you see people, if it looks like they need a smile, give them a smile. If it looks like they need some direction for some help some way, try to reach out to people. It's often the little things that we do or don't do that cumulatively affect people in important ways. So I encourage that. And then I just want to wish everybody happy holidays. Some folks just concluded holiday celebration from their tradition, but just really happy holidays and wonderful New Year.
Thank you. I have no report. Our next agenda item are citizen appearances. We have no guest citizens, but we do have a scheduled public presentation from Chuck Reed. Chuck?
Good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Chuck Reed. I'm the chair of the Historic Preservation Board. I wanted just to take a couple of moments and come tonight and share some thoughts about the last meeting where there was a lot of conversation, specifically surrounding economic development and historic preservation. And it occurred to me that some people may have left that with some type of a misperception that the Historic Preservation Board is not supportive of economic development. And I think it's very important to note that the Historic Preservation Board is very supportive of economic development. The board's mission and statement actually includes the words supporting economic vitality. That's, again, the mission statement. And the Historic Preservation Code's purpose does include that the purposes include enhancing property values and increasing economic and financial benefits to the city and its inhabitants. The board really believes that the downtown is really the best of sustainable economic development. And in large part, we think that that's due to a commitment and a long-term view that's held by the board, also by the council, a clear focus for what people would like to see downtown, a clear vision and a mission, and then design standards that, in fact, have encouraged investments in the downtown. And we actually don't just believe that. We really think that there's proof positive with that. I know several times this year there's been discussion about sales tax data that has been shared in the geographic regions. And when you compare sales tax collections in 2005 and 2011 from the downtown sector, those sales tax collections grew by 69%, which is a phenomenal statement. During 2011, we really had not yet recovered economically and still are rebounding. That compared to the rest of the city, whose average growth was 26%. And so the downtown really is a flagship, and I really believe that that strong positive trend continues today. And I don't think that it's surprising that the Historic Preservation Code was originally approved in 2004, and that the board has really supported and I believe leads in some respects a lot of Littleton's economic development efforts to date. Second thing I'd just like to mention is that next month the Historic Preservation Board is meeting with you in a study session. And last night the board had a great meeting talking about what our hopes are for that meeting. And I'll be working hopefully with the mayor on setting that up. And we're very excited to update you on the review and exploration of the Main Street District's incentives program, and a project that had been requested by you and has been led by Historic Preservation and Planning Board members. Same program that you all supported by increasing the 2013 line item budget for that program, and we're excited about what we're going to be bringing back with that. We're also really looking forward to hearing from you and understanding more about where your thoughts and efforts for economic development are taking you and where you'd like to see us put additional effort. We'd like to hopefully share some information and some literature that links historic preservation and economic development. They are, in fact, good partners. And again, as the 69% increase downtown shows, we really believe that historic preservation has been and will continue to be a useful tool in Littleton's economic development toolbox. And we're really excited about that interaction for next month. And the last, kind of echoing some of the comments from Councilmember Cole, hope you all have a great holiday. Thanks for the work you do. I know how much time I spend doing historic preservation work, and it's only a small percentage of the time I know that you all spend helping build and create and sustain a very healthy and vibrant community. So thank you for that work.
Thank you, Chuck.
I look forward to seeing you in January.
Okay, now it's time for unscheduled public appearances. This is an opportunity for any citizen to express an opinion or ask questions regarding city services, council policies, or other matters of community concern that are not part of the scheduled agenda. Generally, an immediate response should not be expected. The unscheduled public appearances a limit to 4 minutes. If you'd like to come down and speak, please raise your hand, and when you come down, please give us your name and address. Jose?
Good evening, Council. Joseph Trujillo, 5574 South Huron Street, Littleton, Colorado, 80120. I'm your parking guy that's always complaining. And with what's happened with the historic preservation, with all of the businesses that have come in, and the fact that they joined the historic preservation and received an incentive of 50% off of their parking. I've been thinking about how can we solve this problem. It's actually a council problem because of the fact that the developer has to go through the building department. The building department issues these things. They tell you exactly how many spots a business is going to need. And then historic preservation steps up and says, well, you only need half of those if you join the club. And that's understandable. If people want to do that, that's fine. But I have kind of a, I guess it's a solving this problem. The survey that we just was taken showed that we had two big problems. One was snow removal. The other one was parking. Okay, since the developers haven't provided any of the parking that's needed, and this is beyond, the 50% beyond what is given away. Now, that 50% has just kind of went out in limbo somewhere. And there's been some talk that they would create a parking district, et cetera, you know, and these things have been going on for years. And it all comes down to the last thing on the whole proposition is the cost of the project. But I think that we should put an ordinance in that says if you have parking and you haven't put it, you don't have any place to put it, that you should be pay a fee of $18,000 per space. That's the going cost about right now for one space. Now, all of the, from, I say, I don't know exactly how many, let's say a guy has 100, they clip off 50, that's 50 spaces he had to, he still hasn't paid anything on. And this has been the problem we've had is because these guys come in, they say they're going to do this stuff, they're going to provide a district, and it hasn't worked. So my proposition is that the city collect a fee of $18,000 per space, and then when we get sufficient money to buy some space, that can be added onto the building a parking structure. But unless we do this, we're going to be sitting here forever, and there's never going to be any parking provided within the city, in downtown. And it's a big problem right now. I have a lot of my customers, the older ones, that said, well, I can't come downtown. I can't walk 8 blocks because most of the people that are down there are the young ones that are hitting the bars, and they get in there early and they stay late. And so that was just kind of what I was thinking about is why can't we assess a fee? And they pay it up front. You know, stop all this nonsense. Another thing that I would want to talk about was just in the list of merit, and my understanding is that it's went by the wayside, that we don't have it anymore, that letters were going to be sent out to all of the people that were on this list, telling them pro and con about whether they want to stay on it or not. We haven't, at the cemetery, received any letter to that effect so far. So, how about, do you know, Mr. City Manager? Okay.
I do not. I can check with Glenn and get back to you.
Okay, thank you. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose.
Can I comment? Mm-hmm. Jose, I just want to recognize that this parking issue was something that you identified in your business downtown, and when you had the opportunity to, you purchased the land over on Alamo to provide more parking for your establishment, and you should be complimented for taking that on your own shoulders and doing that, because that's a significant output on your profits and on your business.
Well, I thank you, but that was a requirement, and even though I got it,
You found
then
a way to do it.
I found out that historic preservation, and I knocked heads until I was in a catch-22. I either had the parking or they wouldn't give me the permit, so that's how I got it. And I just had to tear out a house, and then, unfortunately, it was in real bad shape. And I offered it to anybody that wanted to take it. No takers. Thank you.
Thanks, Jose. Anyone else? Doug?
It's been a while from this side. Doug Clark, 2454 Houston Waring Circle. Section 51 of the Littleton City Charter is titled Removal Severance Pay. It says, the council shall appoint the city manager for an indefinite term and shall have power to remove him by a majority vote of its members. Upon his removal, the city manager shall be paid the balance of his salary for the current month and his salary for the next calendar month. Section 51 establishes the total amount of monies to be paid to the city manager upon separation of his employment with the city. And it establishes the types of separations that result in payment of those monies. That provision has been in the city charter for 50 years. And for 50 years, councils have abided by that provision up until 2 weeks ago, when you all passed an amendment to your contract with the city manager. And I'd like to make a few points about that amendment and that process. The first point is, while the charter doesn't prohibit you from having a contract with the city manager, you can't use that contract to invalidate city ordinances. And you can't use the contract to invalidate the city charter. And yet, Section 1.2 of your contract with the city manager states that if there's conflict that exists between the contract and city code, which means the ordinances that are passed by you, that the contract prevails. What that means is that you as a council can craft and discuss a contract and its amendments in executive session outside the scrutiny of the public. Come back, pass that contract, and have that contract invalidate ordinances that you are required by charter to discuss in public, post notice, and vote on after a public hearing. If you really believe that this is the way things can work, then what's to prevent you from entering into a contract with yourself for longevity pay, passing the contract, and then claiming that that trumps or overrides the city ordinances that establishes your pay? Second point is, coming up with a clever name doesn't change the fact that you're violating the charter. 9 months ago, your city attorney advised you that you did not have the flexibility of changing the city manager's severance without changing the charter. And if you allow me to read from that communication that she gave to you, it says, the charter provides a severance for the city manager upon termination, i.e. the balance of his salary for the current month and his salary for the next year. Jumping a couple sentences, if such a provision were not contained in the charter, council would have more flexibility in contracting with the city manager. And then jumping a couple sentences, it says, for example, the city could provide a larger severance for if the city manager is terminated for reasons that are not necessarily his fault, such as disability, inability to perform, etc. The city council may wish to consider revisions to the terms of the severance in the charter. You just had an election. You didn't put the charter up. 2 weeks ago, when you voted on this, Mayor Brinkman introduced this amendment as adding a severance package to the contract. When Councilmember Cole pointed out that the charter controls severance payments and severance packages with the city manager, the name suddenly changed to longevity payment. Which brings me to my third point. If this really is a bonus, a payment, a salary, and it's not, But if it really were, then this would probably make you the most spendthrift council in the city's history. Because what you've done is approved a contract that binds you and future councils to at least an 8.3% bonus every year for 12 years, regardless of the performance of the city manager. Since this is actually going to be based on what his salary is at the time of separation, the true rate is going to be higher than 8.3%. It's probably going to be closer to 10%. So what you've done is said that for the next 12 years, without regard to the city manager's performance, you're going to award him, and future councils are going to award him about a 10% bonus in addition to whatever increases you give him to his salary. That's just astounding. The fourth point is that you have a city manager that is advocating violating the city charter for his own financial gains. And this is a very serious process, very serious issue. The issue of a contract and severance came up last year when the council started the search for the city manager. The council decided at that time, just as the previous council decided in 1999 when they started the search for Andy McMenamin's replacement, that the city charter limited what they could provide as a separation or termination package, a severance pay. That was communicated very clearly to the recruiter, the headhunter, along with the decisions on what our salary range was to prevent us from getting into the position of having a finalist going through the interviews and then having the finalist decide that he wouldn't accept employment based on the salaries and benefit packages. Mr. Penny was very well aware of these conditions and the charter when he interviewed, and in fact the issue came up again as we were making an offer, the issue of a contract. And the council again reaffirmed the requirements of the city charter and its position on contracts. Mr. Penny took the job based on those conditions. And my last point is, if you really intend to provide a separation package for the city manager, you've gone about it in a way that's probably not going to be successful. Because future council, you probably won't be the council. Most of you probably won't be on the council that is sitting at the time that the city manager separates. My guess is that council will actually read the charter and feel an obligation to obey the charter. What you've basically created is the high probability of litigation because you've approved a contract that provides a benefit that the charter specifically prohibits you from doing. And when the termination happens at some future point in time, my guess is that council will recognize that they can't do that, but you'll have a contract that obligates you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Carol?
I'm Carol Brezak, and I live in the 4th District. As you know, I watch from home, so I have a few things to discuss, and I've kind of saved them up because I really would prefer to be at home. When you meet in the community room, those of us that are watching, I know I can't be the only one that gets frustrated. This is what happens when you have a meeting and you have a presenter like you had the last time. This is what happens. She's got something up on the whiteboard. We can't hear you. And if you're going to meet in the community room and if you're going to televise it and you want us to hear you, then you need to use your microphones. I don't think it's a problem without solutions. You can get lapel microphones, but if you're going to do that, get them the ones that work. We've experienced ones that haven't. The other thing you could do is arrange the room in a fashion that would put you all in the position of seeing the whiteboard and seeing the speaker, so there's no reason for you to turn away from the microphone. But if you insist on turning away, would you pick it up and put it to your mouth so that we can hear you at home? I kind of felt sorry for Bruce. He was on the phone listening to the meeting. I doubt you heard it any better than I did. But that's the way I hear it most usually. The second item is the business survey. Last week, you guys were discussing or had a presenter talk to you about the survey. I was sent one of the business surveys, and I thought the most appropriate comment that was made about that business, well, I guess maybe even about both surveys, but I think Jim was really talking about the business survey when he made the point that the option of not applicable was not on the survey for a respondent to use. And so I started filling it out, and I experienced exactly what you were describing in the meeting the other night, that maybe not applicable would have been the selection, but it wasn't there, so how do I answer this? And then there were the questions that were asked that wanted me to talk about what's important to the city. Well, there's several things that I think are important to the city, but perhaps not things that I think government should be providing. So I skipped those questions. About the third page of the thing, I quit because I didn't feel like my answers were going to be understood the way I intended them to be understood, and I didn't want to give anybody the opportunity to misrepresent my response. The next item has to do with the charter, and I want to cite Section 36. It talks about your ordinance, resolutions, and motions. It states, the council shall act only by ordinance, resolution, or motion. All legislative enactments must be in the form of ordinances. All other procedures may be in the form of resolutions or motions. The charter also states in Section 37 about voting. The ayes and nays shall be taken upon the passage of all ordinances, resolutions, and motions, and entered upon the journal of the council proceedings. Every ordinance shall require the affirmative vote of the majority of the members present on first reading and a majority of the membership of the entire council for final passage. Resolutions and motions shall require the affirmative vote of a majority of the quorum present. Every member, when present, must vote on ordinance, resolutions, and motions. The council has no power to act outside these conditions. You can only act by ordinance, resolution, or motion, and every member must vote, and every vote must be recorded in the journal or minutes. A council cannot sidestep the issue with semantics by calling a vote a non-vote or a consensus. There is no allowance for a non-vote in your charter. In fact, the charter requires that each member vote. The public has a right to know how each of you have voted on any question put before you. On a further note, when you raise your hands in response to a question before you that the public is watching on TV, you're in the community room and you raise your hand. We don't have a clue who voted which way. And we have a right to know who raised their hand to indicate yes or an aye, and who indicated their hand raised to indicate a nay. And according to the charter, the ayes and nays need to be recorded in your minutes. This council has been meeting on the second and fourth Tuesday of each month in a study session and has been taking votes. You may not call it a vote, but a question is being asked, and each of you raise your hand in favor or not in favor. When you start playing with language to avoid the charter, you are on thin ice and you lose your credibility. I do not understand the objection of calling the meetings on the second and fourth Tuesday of the month a special meeting and record the votes that are taken, as the charter in conjunction with the open meeting law requires. Littleton voters chose the procedure for the council to act by approving the charter. And to say you are just giving Michael direction does not excuse you from the requirements of the charter and the open meetings law. I was prepared to talk about Section 51 of the charter, but Doug certainly gave it a thorough review. I think what I would add to to what he had to say is this business of playing with the language, which he did mention. The amendment to the contract referred to a severance package, and then when it was questioned, it was a longevity package. In my opinion, longevity is the result of working for a period of time for the city and then being rewarded for that long-term service. Longevity is not given upon the resignation or dismissal of an employee. This action was very disappointing and shows a disregard for the charter. Again, a charter approved by the voters. You have an attorney, and your attorney is there to give you legal backing for the actions you want to take. Just because you use a different word to get around the charter does not make it right. If it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it is a duck. Later tonight on the general business, you're going to be talking about your legislative rules. I want to voice my support for the reversal of the action that was taken October 16th. It appears that the action taken in October was violating the citizens' right to petition the council in legislative matters and quasi-judicial hearings. First of all, I don't know how you would enforce such a rule. Secondly, does the rule include any written submission from the staff? I find it very strange indeed that you would not consider any written input into any legislative or quasi-judicial matter before you. We are the citizens that elected you to represent us. So you only represent us if we come down to address you in person? This rule was and is not necessary. If you receive input from a citizen on a legislative or a quasi-judicial matter that is relevant to your decision, then all that is necessary is for you to present that information to the rest of the council during the public hearing so it becomes part of the public record. At that point, every council member has the same information available to them to make their decision. I was shocked to hear that the owner of Delicios was told by our city manager that he was not allowed to petition the council on his behalf with the restaurant renovations that you were considering. What happened to our freedom of speech? Please reverse that rule that you'll be considering later this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Norm?
Good evening. Norm Brown, 6081 South Spotswood Street. I haven't moved in the last 2 weeks, or the last month, I think. I was here before. Perfect segue. Man, those other people, they know what they're talking about. I don't necessarily. I wanted to talk about the item under general business, the legislative rules. My understanding was that's a consideration about input via email or written comment. You guys solicited an awful lot of input in the Inspire Littleton process, and part of that was to access a different demographic through social media and so on and so forth. I think you hired a company. I don't know why that would be valid to consider when you have a quasi-judicial hearing, being, plan development or any of the ones where people can come down and speak. I would suggest that input in any fashion that is similar to the 3 or 4 minutes, I guess it's 4 minutes now, should be considered. I'll remind you of Mr. Grushka, who came down and spoke to you at one point. He is challenged in his visual ability. He has his dog Chandler that assists him. But this is a terrible venue. To be here, to make it down here, he has to use public transportation at this time of night to come down and to return. He's got to come down these steps. He's got to negotiate the parking lot with his dog at night, come down. This is a terrible situation. I would say it's to your detriment not to have input from someone of his intellectual abilities. And, you know, he's got some good thoughts, good opinions. He struck me as erudite, but it's almost impossible for him to make it here for a meeting like this. There's others from the School for the Blind. They're a prominent feature. They're prominent citizens in our community. Very difficult. I've seen them down here before, but this is not easy nor convenient. Let them state their opinion via whatever medium. They can, you know, mail you a letter. We did it during the Walmart hearings. I remember all the email comments that were submitted, collected, solicited. I think, you know, that's sufficient. It's to your detriment if he doesn't get his input added to things, specifically all those people that have difficulty traveling or negotiating stairs and so on. Yes, you can make accommodation for them. They can speak from somewhere else, but that's not as easy. You know, I'm blessed. Most of us are blessed being ambulatory. And it's, if you don't allow it in some form, I think it's to your discredit. It probably means nothing, but it would be a disappointment. Think about those folks. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, seeing no one, we'll move on to our consent agenda. Consent agenda items can be adopted by a simple motion. All ordinances must be read by title. Any consent agenda may be removed at the request of a council member. 7A is recommendation for appointment to Arapahoe County Community Correction Board. This is a recommendation for the 2013 reappointment of Linda Suttle to represent Littleton on the Arapahoe County Community Corrections Board. 7B is a resolution authorizing a memorandum of understanding with the Littleton Public Schools. Littleton Public Schools is the recipient of a Title III immigrant set-aside grant from the Department of Education in the amount of $15,000. The City of Littleton is a sub-recipient under the grant and desires to accept and utilize the funds for the purposes of hiring a part-time student and volunteer coordinator. Item 7C is an agreement with the City of Inglewood for construction and management of the Littleton Community Trail. The City and South Suburban Parks and Rec are partnering to design and construct a ped bike path along the historic city ditch from Lee Gulch to Prentice Avenue and eventually to connect to the Big Dry Creek Trail in Inglewood. There are numerous properties to cross, including ones owned by the Colorado State Land Board, Colorado Center for the Blind, and several other individual private owners. Since the city ditch is managed by the City of Inglewood, it is necessary to enter into an IGA with Inglewood concerning the engineering, construction, and maintenance of the proposed trail. 7D is a motion to approve a First Amendment to agreement for professional services for municipal court judge. The municipal court judge contracts are expiring this month. City Council is being asked to approve an amendment to extend the contracts to January 31, 2013. There are no other modifications, revisions, or amendments to the agreement. Need a motion?
Madam Chairman, I move for approval of consent agenda items 7A through 7D.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to approve consent. Ready to vote?
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Okay. Item 8A, City Attorney.
This is an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Littleton approving the Second Amendment to the European Motor Car of Littleton and Sixth Amendment to the Broadway County Line Commercial Center General Plan Development Plans.
Okay, this is also an ordinance on second reading, and this is a public hearing. So we'll have staff presentation by Glenn.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. What we have here is a case that modifies two planned area developments, in essence, annexing 1.7 acres from the adjacent planned development into the Mercedes-Benz planned development. This would allow the expansion Mercedes-Benz of Littleton of that 1.7 acres. Right now, it's occupied by a self-serve car wash, and the plan is to remove 6 of the 7 bays and then utilize that last bay for a detail area for Mercedes-Benz. Staff finds that the proposed request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and meets the criteria of the plan development. In November of this year, the Planning Board recommended approval by a vote of 7-0, and 2 weeks ago, the Council approved the first reading by a vote of 7-0. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Council, any questions for Glenn? Seeing none, thank you, Glenn. We'll open the public hearing. Anybody who wants to come down and speak to Council regarding this, please do so now. Okay, I don't have a roster, and seeing no one come down, I will close the public hearing, and I need a motion.
I move to approve the ordinance concerning the Second Amendment to the European Motor Car of Littleton and the Sixth Amendment to the Broadway County Line Commercial Center General Plan Development Plans on second reading.
Second.
Okay, Peggy. Council, any discussion? Seeing no discussion, are you ready to vote? Okay, yes vote approves it.
The vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
Okay. Item 9, general business, council legislative rules. Peggy, do you want to present?
Yes, if you don't mind, I will share most of what I think council has already seen. When I asked the city manager to put this on the agenda, I shared my reasons for this. So if you don't mind, for the general public, I will read this. When Councilman Beckman moved in October to limit public hearing input to people coming and being present so that we could ask them questions, that seemed to me really wise and logical. But my brain works slowly, and I got to thinking about it. And so I want to share reasons why I think this is an issue for me. When we passed that, the weather was beautiful. But then when we had recent snow and someone that I love dearly fell in snow-covered ice and hurt himself badly, I started thinking not just about that person, but other people who are physically challenged either temporarily or permanently, or people who are out of town for business, or people who just can't get here for various reasons. Whoops, and we're getting a tweakle of my email here, sorry. I think we don't violate the American Disabilities Act by what we currently have, technically, but I think we're violating the spirit of it, and that's a concern to me. And the recent survey that we had from citizens raised several issues that seem to relate to this. For example, on question 13 in that survey, there were 3 things: opportunities to participate in government decisions. Only 60% of the respondents overall ranked that as excellent or good. Responding to citizen complaints and concerns, only 57% ranked that excellent or good. And Littleton's elected officials' considerations of what people like me, that's a quote, think, only 56% overall. So we certainly have room to improve in terms of people's perceptions of how accessible we are and so forth. So I'm really thinking that we need to allow written comment, whether it's by email or snail mail, I guess even telegram, for people to articulate their views for public hearing issues. if we do that, council would still have to weigh what people say, just as if they were here. I talked with the city clerk about this, and in a minute, I hope she'll say where she thinks maybe we would need to be very careful of how we weigh what we receive. I talked to the city clerk about if we did this, what a deadline would be for receiving such comments in writing so that she could work with them and then tell us numbers of responses or whatever. Anyway, so those are some of my concerns, and I can comment more if you want to ask me some questions. And
Do you want to make a motion?
Okay. What I'd like to move is to substitute for section Roman numeral 5C in council legislative rules. Written comments for a public hearing will be accepted, but must include the name and address of the sender and be received by the city clerk no later than 10 a.m. on the day of the public hearing.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Okay. Oh, geez. We'll start with Jim and go. Jim.
The deadline for submitting to the city clerk, assuming that those comments that would come by email would be forwarded to us, it's not always possible for me to get to a computer to read those prior to getting to the city council meeting. So I wonder about that deadline. And secondly, if it comes by written correspondence, I think we need to have a copy of that written correspondence, so the deadline for that needs to be at a different time than what the email address would be. And that would be my concerns.
The problem with that, Councilmember Taylor, is that people don't see the agenda and what's on it to make a comment until at the earliest Thursday afternoon at 4, and at the latest, which this Friday was very late, at the latest at 5 o'clock on Friday. So there really isn't an opportunity for the public to get those in if there's something on the agenda. They only have really until Tuesday. So I'm not really sure. I just want to throw that out there so that you know that that's a piece of it too, because people don't see the agenda before then. And say, you know, someone reads it on Monday afternoon, they get on the web and they read the agenda and they go, oh, I want to comment, but I can't go to the meeting on Tuesday night. So just a piece of information to
Bruce.
We on occasion concern ourselves with, and I think this was in the survey as well, with trying to include a broader spectrum of the citizenry, and a large portion of the population communicates via text message. Most of them happen to be under 20. But, you know, would a text message received during a council meeting be any less valid a form of communication as an email received at 10, you know, by 9:45 the day before? I don't know that I think it would be. I think it's getting to the point where it's a different form of communication, and I'd be okay getting a text message or having someone up here get a text message if that were a preferred form of communication as input to a decision on the agenda. So I guess I don't, the 10 a.m. thing I don't see as being reason. I don't see a good reason to constrain communication to being received in that fashion.
Can I comment?
Sure.
We'll just go around.
Oh, I'm sorry.
We'll go around. Phil.
Okay. I'm very much okay with receiving text communication, but in also trying to make sure that it's evenly. You know, there's some particular questions I'd have on whether a text message ends up being an even communication, and to allow for the distribution in Jim's thought would be to say it comes to City Center, and as with any of our communication, it comes through either the city clerk or the city manager for agenda items, or the city attorney in that. So any one of those three would be fine, and anything written can be, with our technology, be scanned and email distributed to the council. And I, like on today, I could tell you that I wasn't at a computer for a long period of time today to be able to receive anything. And I would like that deadline to be, well, I'll throw it out as for consideration. I'll make a motion later to amend that to be 10 a.m. on Monday, the day before the council meeting. And if someone isn't able to make it, any item that we're talking about that's going to be subject to a public hearing is going to have both a first and a second reading. And so if we don't get it by the first meeting, but I'd like to get it in a time to be able to review it and read it before that, and have an evenness of communication that goes across, and wouldn't like to put anyone at a disadvantage. And that would be the time frame, and I'm prepared to make that after we cycle around.
Bruce.
Yeah, I have no problems at all with this discussion. I think during our legislative study session, this one didn't get nearly this kind of consideration for the problems of electronic media, and that was really what was driving it when I brought it up. It's the new media and ways to ensure there's equity of ability there to use that, as there is when somebody comes to the podium and speaks. That's a pretty equitable situation, and how they do it compared to someone else, and that equity wasn't there at the time for the media, and I think our solution didn't really address the problem, which we're doing tonight. So I'm in support of this discussion.
Jerry.
I was going to say the deadline for written correspondence can be set to whatever the heck we think is appropriate, and there needs to be some reasonableness there. As far as text messaging goes, it does have some, at least today, it has some hurdles that may not make it convenient for all of us to have or distribute, unless they all went to one number at the city where they could print them off and give them to us. I know, but if it came to my phone here while we're at a meeting, I don't think that would be reasonable. I do think that this is not about what is convenient for city council. This is about citizen participation. So it is expected of us to get the information, just like you had to get it today at one point or another. You knew you did. Just as when we get this information, typically a week before or thereabouts, before we get our packets electronically, we're expected to download those things and read them. I think there does need to be a reasonable deadline, though, for the city to take, whether it's the phone calls, the emails, written correspondence. It needs to be identified. It needs to be reasonable. It needs to be normal. And not everybody is texting. In fact, texting to some folks is already old school. So we need to make sure we are keeping up with the technology there. I do think it's important, though, that there be a deadline set so that we can get that information and review that information. When I was on Planning Commission, there were a couple items that we looked at over the years that we received hundreds of items, and I read those things. And it takes time for the clerk to prepare those for us and to read. She has to make them and get them to us. So I think it's an excellent amendment that you want to make to this. I'm all for it. It is for the citizens. I want to hear it with the expectation that there is a reasonableness of when they do need to get it in. As far as folks not paying attention to the agenda, that's never going to go away. There's always going to be those folks doing that. But there are a number of folks out there that do pay attention, and this will help folks, maybe it'll help more to get involved. So,
one of the things that I have discussed a bit with some other mayors and that they do in their council meetings is that they accept phone calls during the meeting. So there's an open call time where the community, and it would need to be published, it would need to be on the agenda, and it's specifically for, maybe it's in the comments, or it could be when we've got public hearings, but it is an opportunity for people to essentially appear, to speak as they do come down to the dais, but they don't have to be here physically. And that may be something that we could look at that would meet some of those additional needs. Peggy, did you want to first address the issue and then Bruce?
Yeah, so I'm not at all opposed to moving the time up. I had initially suggested to the city clerk the comments would have to be received by Monday, and then she was suggesting that she could accommodate Tuesday. So I would take it as a friendly change to the motion without an amendment, if we could do it, to say actually to receive things by noon on the Monday before the public hearing. Would that, but I want to know what the city clerk would say about that.
Kirsten?
I would just want to add one more thing. First of all, setting aside the issue of the Title II of the American Disabilities Act, which we are required to accommodate. So if we're ever in that situation, we would accommodate that in whatever way we could. But putting that aside, we just had Tammy Tenoyan here from SIRSA talking about her recommendation being that we take sworn testimony. And so you may, and that was in the quasi-judicial setting, you may want to split this into two separate issues where the legislative we're a little bit more flexible than we are in the quasi-judicial setting. Although we don't swear our witnesses in, that is the best practices, and perhaps the phone comments are better for the quasi-judicial so that you do weigh the credibility in as if it were a court hearing. So I think it might even be better to split this into legislative, where you can be a lot more lax about the comments you take than in a public hearing.
Bruce first and then Phil.
Well, I like Jerry's comment about, obviously the intent here is supposed to be and is what's best for the citizens as far as communicating. But let me pose it as, and I think the comments are strong. Let me pose this as just sort of a devil's advocate question. And I agree with you. I mean, it'd be best to get information ahead of time so that we could consider it or noodle it. Yet at some point, if somebody comes down in person and raises an issue that we hadn't previously heard or considered, there would be no advance notice on that. So from my perspective, an email or a text message or some form of communication, issues that communicate to me is that somebody's getting the opportunity to make a communication, and the form of that communication, I think we should be broadly interpreting. But I mean, I totally get what you're saying, that it's, it's about making it easy for people to do it. And then if there were a way to get critical information so we could consider it in advance, and maybe that's Phil's point about first versus second reading. But I'd hate to cut anybody out.
Yeah. And
just because by form only is, I guess, what I'm thinking.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to make the amendment that we, the deadline be at 12 noon on the Monday before the public hearing. Hopefully that provides well, I'll make that motion. See if I get a second.
Okay, you've got a second. We've got a motion and a second. Discussion?
Yes. Part of the reason for that, Bruce, is to make sure that it gets distributed to us. It's not trying to cut folks off. It really is there. And I'm quite willing to say at some point in time we can look at Skype communication coming into the city center. I'm okay with that. What my concern is that we all get it evenly.
Understand.
Rather than it being interpreted or voice inflected by someone other than the intended.
I appreciate that.
The person providing it. So that's where my comment comes from.
Okay, we have a motion and a second to the amendment on the floor. City Manager, did you?
I know these are challenging items when we're throwing out dates and times and trying to coordinate, and I would just put on the table as an offer that one of the things that we could do in conjunction with the city attorney's office is come back, I think, as long as we have heard the intent of the council, we could come back with a proposed new 5C at our next meeting so that you guys aren't doing these, because I'd hate to have you guys make a motion and then when we're actually logistically or operationally putting it into place, it'd be probably better for the city clerk to really take the lead and look at calendar. How do we get communications through? You know, text does not have any name associated with it, so there's no confirmation of who they are, where they live. Can we get a phone? A lot of these things. So just putting it on the table.
Point of order question, can we table
Yeah.
with an amendment?
We can postpone to our next regular meeting.
We have, I believe last time we did this, we have to get rid of the amendment, but we can have the original motion on the floor and table it.
Yeah.
So we have an amendment on the floor, and does everybody understand that?
No, what is the amendment?
Phil, will you repeat your amendment, please?
The amendment is to have the electronic or written communication requirement come to the city center by 12 noon on the day before the public hearing.
And question, so voting no on that amendment would allow us to get back to the original amendment, which we would table for our next meeting when we would have some
Either way,
understanding of technically how we'd be able to do it.
Yeah, you could vote yes or no on it, but it will have little effect if you vote yes.
Right, and one just sub note, as I heard Peggy's original motion, it only had to do with the public hearing. It did not have to do with the quasi-judicial sessions, so that's a footnote.
Okay. Anyway, we're at the amendment. Ready to vote?
The vote is 3 in favor with Councilmember Stallman, Councilmember Brinkman, Councilmember Valdez, and Councilmember Beckman voting no. The motion fails.
And a motion to table consideration of the main motion until our next regular meeting, at which point in time we might entertain a proposal from staff.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? I will add that I am not in favor of an option of texting at this point. I think that it would be very disruptive to have council members sitting up here getting texts.
Well, some of us can't, so.
And some can't. And I think that the other part of the fact that they can't be identified off of a text, I think it would create a disruption. If somebody has a phone that can text, they also have email, and they also have, if we can organize some way for phone calls to come in. So it's not prohibiting them from a way to communicate with us. That's just my preference, is that I'm not. Okay.
And I can research all those options and see
Okay.
what other cities are doing and what they're accepting in their council and all of that. So I'll do research on
Jerry.
the whole gamut.
As far as who receives the information, I think that's critical too, because Peggy might receive something and she may not check her information. So I think it does need to be identified where this information needs to go to. Because if one of us is getting it and we don't check our messages on our, whether it's a text or whatever, but we did check our city email to make sure we had everything, I think that would be, we could miss some information there. I think there needs to be direct information on where it should be sent to.
Well, or that any council member who receives a contact forwards it.
But as I just said, Peggy, though, I have another job during the day, and I'm very busy. I'm not able to check my messages, and if somebody has sent me, if a dozen people have sent me something, I may not have had the chance to see it, but yet I stayed up late Monday night reading everything I did have.
Right.
But if someone sends me more information, I may not have a chance to read it myself, let alone forward it to the city so they can distribute it. So I would prefer that it be written with a location of where information would be sent to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bruce.
And I don't think that's an unfair comment. I think the other thing we should consider, and maybe others have, that if we're going to accept theoretically that type of communication, that there are some standards. So somebody would have to identify name, address, and then the text message is, to make it a valid communication at that level. I mean, you can't just get to, yes, I like this idea or something just out of nowhere, and we can maybe consider that. The other thing I was going to mention is if we're taking this up at the meeting on the 15th, yeah, I've got a problem in that I've got a work commitment where we've got to contest an urban renewal issue up in Fort Collins for one of the stores, and unfortunately they meet on Tuesday, and I don't think I'm going to. There's a high likelihood I may not be at the 15th, so I would just say that in a general sense, I'm very supportive of the issue.
But you mean the 15th of January?
Yes.
I think our rules say that you
Okay.
don't get a vote in this matter if you're not here.
I wouldn't vote on it, so I was just communicating in a general sense that I'm supportive of the conversation.
We're good. We're good. We have a
None of the rest
motion.
of us can communicate
Council,
during family.
Council, we have a
Can I
motion
text
on the
you?
table. We have a motion on the table
Table until.
to table until a date to be determined. Or are we going to do January 15th?
I have January 15th. That was the motion.
All right, January 15th.
The next regular meeting.
The vote is 6 in favor with Mayor Brinkman voting no.
Oh,
Motion carries.
oops. Oops. Yeah. That happened. Okay, pardon me?
You want
You
to?
didn't accidentally vote no, did you?
Mm-hmm.
Well,
That's okay. Hey, I can live with my mistakes. It passed.
Really not difficult. It's either up or down.
I know. Okay, council, we go to item 13, an executive session. Councilmember Stallman.
Yeah, the move that City Council conduct an executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute Section 24-6-402, sub 4, sub E, for informing negotiators relating to municipal judge contract negotiations, and pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute 24-6-402, sub 4, sub B, to confer with the city attorney regarding Colorado Constitutional Amendment 64 concerning marijuana legalization, and that included in the meeting will be City Council, City Manager Penny, and City Attorney Crawford.
Okay, ready to
Second.
vote? Yeah, we need a second. Okay. Correct.
the vote is 7 in favor. The motion carries.
You went up this time?
Okay, council will not return after the exec session.
Oh,
We are adjourned.